I am Isolde, 29 years old, and I once believed my wedding day would be the happiest of my life. Instead, I discovered my own parents and sister plotting to humiliate me in front of everyone I love. The devastating betrayal left me sleepless for days, but something inside me refused to be their victim. What happened next shocked everyone, especially my family. They never saw it coming. If you enjoy stories about family drama with a satisfying twist, let me know where you are watching from, hit subscribe, and stick around to see how I turned the tables on my own flesh and blood. Growing up in our affluent Connecticut suburb, I always felt like I was performing on a stage rather than living in a home. My father Thomas was a prominent cardiac surgeon whose reputation in the medical community was matched only by his coldness at home. At 58, he commanded respect in every room he entered with salt and pepper hair that never had a strand out of place and a posture that screamed authority. His patients adored him, but his family knew a different man, one who measured love in achievements and status. My mother, Eleanor, dedicated her life to climbing the social ladder. With her perfectly maintained blonde bob and designer wardrobe, she orchestrated our family image with military precision. Every dinner party, charity function, and school event was an opportunity to showcase our perfect family. Behind closed doors, she critiqued everything from my posture to my career choices, always finding me slightly lacking. Then there was my sister Mallory, 3 years older, at 32, who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. While I struggled for crumbs of affection, she feasted on their approval. Her academic achievements were celebrated with lavish parties, while mine earned brief nods of acknowledgement. When Mallory decided to follow our father into medicine, becoming a dermatologist catering to wealthy clients, my parents glowed with pride. My choice to pursue interior design was dismissed as playing with furniture. The pattern started early. On my 10th birthday, I received a sensible educational gift while watching my parents surprise Mallory with a horse, for no particular occasion that same week. When I brought home straight A's in high school, my father glanced at my report card and said, "Mallory had the same grades while participating in 3 more extracurriculars." Even our family photos told the story, with Mallory positioned prominently, while I was often partially obscured or told to stand a bit to the side. Despite this, I kept trying. I graduated top of my class in college, built a successful interior design business, catering to upscale clients, and still sought their approval at every turn. I became a master of anticipating their needs, adjusting my opinions to match theirs, and shrinking myself to fit their expectations. My friends noticed how I would check my phone anxiously after sending my parents news, how my voice would change when speaking to them, becoming higher, more eager to please. I dated men they would approve of, wore clothes that wouldn't embarrass them, and chose an apartment in a neighborhood they considered acceptable. Each choice made me smaller, quieter, less myself, but I convinced myself it was worth it if they would finally see me. Everything changed when I met Jackson at a charity auction for the Children's Hospital, where my father occasionally performed surgeries. At 31, Jackson stood out in the crowd, not because he was trying to, but because he seemed completely comfortable being himself. As a successful architect specializing in sustainable design, he approached me after overhearing my passionate conversation with the event designer about the disappointing floral arrangements. "You sound like you could have done a better job," he said with a genuine smile that reached his warm brown eyes. "I bet you could transform this whole place." That night, for the first time in years, someone was actually interested in my opinions. Jackson listened intently as I described my design philosophy. He laughed at my jokes. He asked questions that showed he was truly listening. By the time we exchanged numbers, I felt seen in a way I never had before. When I introduced Jackson to my parents 2 months later, their disapproval was immediate, though carefully disguised. My father shook his hand firmly, but immediately launched into questions about his family background and educational pedigree. My mother sized up his well-made but not designer suit with a slight purse of her lips. Mallory asked pointed questions about his client list, clearly fishing for weaknesses. Jackson handled it all with grace, but afterward, in the privacy of my apartment, he asked a question that shook my foundation. "Isolde, do they always treat you like that? Like nothing you do is quite good enough?" I started to make excuses the way I always did. "They just have high standards. They want what's best for me." Jackson took my hands in his. "I think what's best for you is to be appreciated for the incredible person you are, not constantly measured against impossible standards." His words cracked something open inside me. Over the next year, as our relationship deepened, Jackson gently helped me see the toxic patterns in my family dynamics. He celebrated my successes without qualification. He supported me when I took creative risks in my business. And most importantly, he loved me without conditions or comparisons. When he proposed on a surprise weekend trip to Maine, standing on a cliffside with the ocean crashing below, I said yes without hesitation. That night, as we talked about wedding plans over champagne in our cozy bed and breakfast, Jackson suggested eloping. "We could do something intimate, just us and a few close friends," he said, playing with my hair. No stress, no drama, just celebrating our love. The idea tempted me, but years of conditioning kicked in. "My parents would never forgive me," I said. "They've always expected a proper wedding. My mother has probably been planning it since I was born." Jackson sighed but didn't push. "Whatever makes you happy is older. But remember, it's our day, not theirs." I should have listened to him. Instead, I called my parents the next morning to share our news, still hoping, after all those years, for their wholehearted approval. Their lukewarm reaction should have been my first warning of what was to come. "Well, I suppose congratulations are in order," my mother said when I told her about our engagement, her voice carrying the enthusiasm of someone acknowledging a mediocre meal. "We should discuss dates soon. The country club books up quickly for the good months." That phone call set the tone for what became 8 months of wedding planning warfare. My initial excitement about creating a day that represented Jackson and me quickly evaporated as my mother seized control of every detail. The first casualty was our venue. Jackson and I had fallen in love with a renovated historic barn with exposed beams, twinkling string lights, and surrounding gardens that would have been perfect for our spring wedding. When I showed my mother pictures, she physically recoiled. "A barn is older, we are not farmers. Your father is one of the most respected surgeons in the Northeast. What would the hospital board say?" She flipped open her leather planner. "I have already spoken to Cynthia at the Lakeside Country Club. They had a cancellation for May 15th. I have placed a hold on it." I tried to protest, but she continued as if I hadn't spoken. "The ballroom can accommodate 200 guests comfortably. I have started compiling the guest list." 200? I echoed. Mum, Jackson and I were thinking something smaller, maybe 70 people who are actually important to us. My mother's perfectly penciled eyebrows rose. "Important. I suppose your father's colleagues who have known you since birth are not important, or the Sullivans who could provide valuable connections for your little design business." By the time I left her house that day, we had a venue I didn't want, and a guest list where I recognized only about a third of the names. Jackson was disappointed, but supported my desire to keep the peace. "As long as we end up married at the end of the day," he said, kissing my forehead. The next battle was over my dress. I had envisioned something simple and elegant, perhaps with vintage lace, that complemented my curves without overwhelming my 5'4" frame. My mother had other ideas and scheduled appointments at the most exclusive bridal boutiques in the city. "Your shoulders are too broad for that style," she commented at the first shop as I tried on a dress I loved. "And that neckline does nothing for your chest. You need something more structured to give you a waistline." Mallory, who had insisted on joining these outings, nodded in agreement. "Plus white is so traditional. With your colouring, maybe ivory would be less washing out." After 5 boutiques and countless disparaging comments, I found myself in a heavily beaded, excessively structured gown that my mother and sister approved of, though it felt like wearing an ornate cage. The sales associate caught my expression in the mirror. "Are you sure this is the one, but?" she asked quietly while my mother and Mallory discussed veil options. I nodded, defeated. "It makes them happy." The pattern continued with every wedding detail. My choice of seasonal wildflowers was overruled in favour of elaborate imported roses and orchids. My carefully selected menu, highlighting our favourite foods, was scrapped for traditional fare that would not raise eyebrows. Even our wedding cake, which we wanted to be a simple 3-tier with buttercream, became a towering 7-tier monstrosity with fondant and sugar sculptures that neither Jackson nor I would enjoy eating. Throughout this process, my friends Lauren and Sophia became my lifelines. Lauren, my college roommate and maid of honour, witnessed my slow surrender firsthand. "This is your wedding ISO," she said during one of our weekly coffee dates. "You are allowed to put your foot down." "You do not understand my mother," I replied, stirring my latte absently. "Fighting her is like fighting a hurricane. It is exhausting and pointless." Sophia, my colleague and bridesmaid, was more blunt. "Your family is toxic and you are letting them poison what should be the happiest time of your life." I knew they were right, but years of conditioning had left me without the tools to establish boundaries. Jackson was becoming increasingly concerned as well. After a particularly tense family dinner 6 weeks before the wedding, where Mallory had subtly suggested that Jackson's architectural firm wasn't prestigious enough to attract truly elite clients, he finally expressed his frustration. "They are never going to change Isolde," he said as we drove home. "No achievement will ever be enough. No effort will ever earn their approval. At some point, you have to decide if chasing their validation is worth sacrificing your happiness." "They are my family," I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. What else can I do? As the wedding drew closer, my anxiety escalated. I lost weight, my sleep became fragmented, and I found myself constantly checking my phone for messages from my mother with new demands or criticisms. The final dress fitting 1 week before the wedding should have been a joyful milestone. Instead, it became yet another opportunity for my mother and sister to undermine me. "The alterations have not done enough to flatter your figure," my mother said, circling me like a shark. "Perhaps we should speak to the seamstress about additional structure in the bodice." "And your arms," Mallory added, pinching the skin above my elbow. "You should have done those exercises I recommended. Too late now, I suppose." I stood there in my beautiful but wrong dress, looking at my reflection and hardly recognizing myself. Not just because of the dress, but because of how small I had allowed myself to become, trying to earn the approval of people who seemed incapable of giving it. Little did I know that the true extent of their feelings was about to be revealed in the most painful way possible. The discovery happened on a Tuesday evening, exactly 1 week before my wedding day. I had stopped by my parents' house to pick up the custom welcome bags my mother had insisted on assembling herself. The house was quiet when I arrived, which was unusual. Normally, my mother would be waiting by the door with a list of tasks or criticisms at the ready. Instead, I found a note on the kitchen counter saying they were in my father's study discussing some last-minute wedding details and would be out shortly. The welcome bags were stacked neatly by the front door, but I realized my mother had texted me earlier about some special ribbons she wanted me to take as well. Rather than wait, I decided to quickly grab them from her craft room and then let them know I was there. As I passed by my father's study, I heard their voices. I was about to knock when I caught the sound of my own name, followed by my sister's laughter, sharp and unkind, in a way that made me pause. Isolde has always been so desperate for approval. My father was saying, his voice carrying that clinical tone he used when discussing particularly pathetic patients. "Did you see her face when I told her I had managed to get Judge Reynolds to attend like a puppy being thrown a bone? The poor thing actually believes we support this marriage," my mother replied, and I could picture her dismissive hand wave. As if we would ever truly accept an architect with new money and no social connections as our son-in-law. I stood frozen, my hand suspended inches from the door. A logical part of my brain urged me to walk away to preserve what little dignity I had left. But I remained rooted to the spot as my sister spoke. The guest list was genius mother. 200 people to witness her embarrassment, most of them father's colleagues and your social circle, people who actually matter. Speaking of embarrassment, my father continued, "I have prepared quite the speech for the reception. Remember how she wet the bed until she was 11, and that unfortunate acne phase in high school? I have collected slides." My stomach twisted as if I had been physically struck. This could not be happening. These were my parents, my own flesh and blood. Surely there was some explanation, some misunderstanding. "Eleanor, have you decided what to do about the photos?" my father asked. "I have spoken with the photographer," my mother answered smoothly. "He understands that certain angles are unflattering for Isolde. We have agreed on a strategy to ensure she looks presentable. Though why she refused to consider a minor cosmetic procedure before the wedding is beyond me. Her nose has always been problematic in profile." The casual cruelty of their conversation made my knees weak. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my breathing, which had become shallow and rapid. "My contribution will be the pièce de résistance," Mallory said, her voice smug and satisfied. "I have been practicing. Right after father's toast, when everyone is watching, I will trip and spill red wine on her dress. But when I try to help clean it, I will tear the lace panel on the side. It will look like an accident, of course." "Brilliant," my mother approved. "She will be too mortified to enjoy the rest of her own wedding. If nothing else, my father added, it will make for memorable photos, something to remind her of her place in this family. Not good enough for a surgeon's daughter." Mallory laughed. "Not good enough for a Brennan," my mother corrected. "Never has been," my father concluded. Their words sliced through me like scalpels, precise and devastating. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their love, believing that if I just tried harder, achieved more, became perfect enough they would finally see me. But in that moment, with crystal clarity, I realized the painful truth: nothing would ever be enough, because the problem had never been me. It had always been them. Somehow, I managed to back away silently from the door. My body moved on autopilot, retrieving my purse from the kitchen and slipping out the front door without taking the welcome bags. I made it to my car before the first sob tore from my throat, a primal sound of grief and betrayal that I muffled with my hand. The drive home passed in a blur of tears. My mind replayed their words, each one a fresh wound. By the time I pulled into my apartment's parking lot, I had cycled through shock, devastation, and numbness. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, and tried to decide what to do next. Cancel the wedding, that was my first instinct. How could I go through with a ceremony that my own family was actively planning to sabotage? But then I thought of Jackson, who had become my true home. Why should I let them take that from me too? With trembling fingers, I called the one person who always made me feel safe. "Hey, beautiful," Jackson answered on the second ring, his voice warm. "Everything okay with the welcome bags?" They were planning to humiliate me, I whispered, my voice breaking. "My own family. At our wedding." "What, Isolde, where are you?" "In my car, outside our apartment." "Stay there. I am coming down right now." Seconds later, Jackson burst through the building's front door and ran to my car. He opened the driver's side door and knelt beside me, his face a picture of concern. I collapsed into his arms, sobbing as I recounted every terrible detail of what I had overheard. Jackson held me tight, his body tensing with anger as I spoke. When I finished, he cupped my face gently in his hands. "Listen to me, Isolde. We do not have to go through with this wedding. Not the big ceremony, not any of it. We can elope tomorrow. We can cancel everything. Whatever you want to do, I am with you 100%. I looked into his eyes, so full of love and righteous anger on my behalf, and something shifted inside me. A lifetime of shrinking myself, of accepting scraps of affection, of believing I was never quite enough, crystallized into a single moment of clarity. "No," I said, wiping my tears. "I am not going to let them win. Not this time." The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I had never felt before. The pain was still there, a deep ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe at times, but alongside it was something new: determination. I would not be a victim at my own wedding. I would not give my family the satisfaction of seeing me broken. Jackson had taken the day off work to be with me, and over coffee at our kitchen table, we began to form a plan. But I knew we needed reinforcements. "I am calling Lauren and Sophia," I said, reaching for my phone. "We need all the help we can get." They arrived within the hour, faces tight with concern. That quickly transformed into outrage as I recounted what I had overheard. Lauren, always the strategist with her background in public relations, immediately started pacing. "We need to approach this carefully," she said, her mind clearly racing. A direct confrontation would only give them time to create new ways to sabotage the wedding. "What if we just changed everything?" Sophia suggested. "New venue, smaller guest list, different date." "Yesemi." I shook my head. "We do not have time for that, and honestly, I do not want to. This is my wedding too. I have already compromised on everything else. I will not let them take the day itself from me." Jackson squeezed my hand. "What do you want to do, Isolde?" I took a deep breath. "I want them to face consequences for once in their lives. I want everyone to see who they really are." And so Operation Wedding Revenge was born. Our first step was to meet with our wedding planner, Diane, who had witnessed my mother's controlling behaviour firsthand over the past 8 months. When I told her what had happened, leaving out some of the more painful details, her professional composure cracked. "I knew something was off with your mother, but this is beyond the pale," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "Whatever you need, I am in." Together we made critical changes to the wedding plans that my family would not be aware of. The seating arrangement was subtly modified to ensure my parents and sister would be positioned at their own table, slightly separated from the other guests. The program was updated to remove my father's planned toast, entirely replaced with speeches from Jackson's father and Lauren. And most importantly, my dress was secured at Diane's office, rather than delivered to my parents' house as originally planned. "What about Mallory's wine-spilling plan?" Lauren asked as we worked. "I have an idea for that," Jackson said, pulling out his phone. "My college roommate Marcus works in audiovisual production. He owes me a favour." While Jackson arranged for hidden cameras and microphones to be set up at the strategic locations throughout the venue, I made the most important call of all to my grandmother Margaret. My father's mother had always been a force of nature, a formidable woman who had raised 4 children largely on her own after my grandfather died young. She had never quite approved of my mother seeing through her social climbing from day one, and the feeling was mutual. As a result, my parents had limited our contact with her over the years, claiming her health was too fragile for frequent visits. In reality, at 80 years old, Grandma Margaret was sharper and more vibrant than most people half her age. When she answered the phone, her voice brought immediate comfort. "Isolde, my sweet girl, I was just thinking about you. Wedding nerves setting in, yet..." "Grandma," I said, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. "Something awful has happened and I need your help." I told her everything, holding nothing back. The silence on the other end of the line grew longer until I feared we had been disconnected. "Grandma, are you still there?" "I am here," she said, her voice low and dangerous in a way I had never heard before. "And I am coming to Connecticut tomorrow. Do not tell your parents. I will handle this." "What are you going to do?" I asked. "What I should have done years ago," she replied cryptically. "In the meantime, you focus on being a beautiful bride. Leave your parents to me." With Grandma Margaret mobilized, we continued preparing multiple contingency plans. Jackson's friend Marcus helped us set up a system to record any attempts at sabotage and prepared a special surprise for the reception. Lauren worked with the venue staff to ensure they knew to come to her, not my mother, with any questions or issues on the day of the wedding. Sophia took charge of my dress and accessories, ensuring they would be completely secure until the ceremony. As the days passed, I maintained a perfect facade whenever I interacted with my family. At our final dinner together before the wedding, I smiled and nodded as my mother criticized the flower arrangements, and my father complained about the quality of guests from Jackson's side. "You seem different," Mallory commented suspiciously as we cleared the dessert plates. Unusually calm for a bride days before her wedding. "Kassan." I met her eyes steadily. "I guess I have just accepted that some things are beyond my control." She seemed unsettled by my response, a slight furrow appearing between her perfectly shaped eyebrows. For the first time in my life, I felt a strange power in being underestimated by my family. They had no idea what was coming, and I intended to keep it that way until the perfect moment. My wedding day dawned clear and bright, with the kind of perfect spring weather that wedding planners dream about. But instead of waking up in my childhood bedroom as originally planned, I opened my eyes in a luxury suite at the hotel adjacent to our venue, surrounded by my bridesmaids. "Good morning, bride-to-be," Lauren sang out, throwing open the curtains to let in the morning light. "Ready for the best day of your life." And strangely enough, despite everything I was. The weight of my family's betrayal had not disappeared, but it had transformed into something different, something that fueled rather than crushed me. Today would be about Jackson and me, our love and our future, not my family's toxic games. My phone buzzed with messages from my mother and sister, demanding to know why I had not spent the night at home, and insisting they come to the hotel immediately to help me prepare. I texted back a simple response: "Getting hair and makeup done with bridesmaids. See you at venue before ceremony." Their frustration was palpable, even through text, but I felt no guilt. For the first time, I was prioritizing my own well-being over their expectations, and it felt surprisingly liberating. The morning preparations became a celebration in themselves. My friends had created a sanctuary where I could truly enjoy the process of becoming a bride. We sipped champagne, shared stories, and laughed in a way I realized I rarely did around my family. When my hair and makeup artist finished her work, I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, but because I looked happy radiantly and genuinely happy. "You look absolutely stunning," Sophia whispered, helping me into my dress, which now felt less like a cage and more like armor. "Jackson is going to lose his mind when he sees you." We arrived at the venue 2 hours before the ceremony, entering through a side door to avoid any chance of running into my family. Diane met us, clipboard in hand and determination in her eyes. "Everything is set," she assured me. "Jackson's friend has the cameras in place. Your grandmother arrived an hour ago and asked to speak with your parents and sister privately. They are in the small conference room now." "My grandmother is already here." I had not expected her until right before the ceremony. Diane nodded. She was very insistent, quite a remarkable woman. Curiosity got the better of me, and I slipped down the hallway toward the conference room, careful to stay out of sight. Through a window in an adjacent room, I could just see inside. My grandmother stood tall and regal in a deep blue dress, silver hair perfectly coiffed. One finger pointed accusingly at my father. Even from a distance, I could see that his face had gone pale. My mother's lips were pressed into a thin line, and Mallory looked uncharacteristically subdued. I could not hear what was being said, but the body language told me enough. For once, my family was not in control, and they did not like it one bit. When they finally emerged from the room 15 minutes later, all three looked shaken. My mother's carefully applied makeup could not hide her reddened eyes, my father's shoulders were uncharacteristically slumped, and Mallory kept glancing nervously at my grandmother as if afraid she might spontaneously combust. Whatever Grandma Margaret had said to them had clearly hit home. I felt a surge of gratitude for this formidable woman who had come to my defense when I needed it most. As guests began to arrive, another surprise unfolded. Among them were familiar faces I had not expected to see, relatives from my father's side of the family who had been estranged for years due to various conflicts my parents had never fully explained. My father's brother, Uncle Robert, and his wife, my Aunt Patricia, along with their adult children, my cousins whom I barely knew. Somehow, my grandmother had rallied the extended family, creating yet another layer of witnesses to whatever might unfold. The ceremony setting was exactly as I had envisioned before my mother took over the planning. The garden was in full bloom, with white chairs arranged in neat rows and an arch of wildflowers marking the spot where Jackson and I would exchange vows. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over everything, creating the romantic atmosphere I had always dreamed of. From my hiding spot inside, I watched my mother and father take their seats in the front row, their faces a careful mask of parental pride that did not reach their eyes. Mallory sat beside them, fidgeting with her bridesmaid bouquet, her eyes scanning the crowd as if assessing who would witness her planned sabotage. None of them knew that their plot had been discovered. None of them suspected that today would not go according to their cruel plan. The music began signaling the start of the ceremony. My bridesmaids proceeded down the aisle one by one, with Mallory going last, casting a smile at our parents that made my stomach turn. And then it was my turn. Standing at the entrance with no one to walk me down the aisle, having decided against asking my father after what I had discovered, I took a deep breath. For a moment, I considered all that had led me to this point, all the pain and betrayal, all the years of seeking approval that would never come. Then I looked up and saw Jackson waiting for me beneath the flower arch, his eyes filled with so much love that everything else faded away. This was why I was here. Not for my family's approval, not for the social standing or perfect photos, but for the life I was choosing, with the man who loved me exactly as I was. I walked down the aisle alone, chin held high, feeling stronger with each step. Jackson's face lit up as I approached, and when our eyes met, a sense of rightness washed over me. This was where I belonged. The ceremony itself was a blur of emotion and beauty. We exchanged personal vows that had my friends and many guests wiping away tears. When the officiant pronounced us husband and wife, Jackson's kiss was filled with promise and protection, as if sealing a pact between us that no one, not even my family, could break. As we turned to face our guests as a married couple, I caught sight of my parents. They were applauding politely, but their eyes were wary, watching Mallory as if waiting for her to make her move. My grandmother, seated on the opposite side of the aisle, gave me a subtle nod and a wink. Whatever she had said to them earlier had clearly put them on notice, but they did not yet know the full extent of what was coming. The reception began with cocktail hour in the garden, before moving into the ballroom for dinner. Jackson and I circulated among our guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes. When we approached my parents, my mother embraced me stiffly. The ceremony was nice, she said, her voice lacking its usual critical edge. You look lovely, Isolde. Yes, very nice. My father echoed, his eyes not quite meeting mine. Their subdued behaviour was so out of character that several of their friends commented on it, asking if they were feeling well. I merely smiled and moved on, knowing that the evening's main event was yet to come. As dinner concluded and the time for speeches approached, I felt a flutter of nervous anticipation. Everything was in place, but there was still so much that could go wrong. Jackson sensed my tension and squeezed my hand under the table. Whatever happens, he whispered, we are in this together. The moment of truth had arrived. The wedding reception was in full swing. The ballroom glowed with the warm light of hundreds of candles, the elegant centerpieces catching the light in exactly the way I had envisioned before my mother took over the planning. The band played softly in the background as servers cleared the dinner plates and prepared for the dessert course. To any outside observer, it appeared to be a perfectly ordinary, if lavish, wedding reception, but beneath the surface currents of tension flowed. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, repeatedly checking his watch and glancing at the program. He had noticed his toast had been removed and had cornered the wedding planner earlier, who smoothly informed him that due to time constraints, only the best man and maid of honor would be speaking. His frustration was evident in the tight set of his jaw, but my grandmother's presence at a nearby table seemed to prevent him from making a scene. My mother maintained her social smile, but her eyes constantly darted to Mallory, who sat fidgeting with her wineglass, clearly waiting for her moment. What they did not know was that the servers had been instructed to serve Mallory alcohol-free white wine that only looked like the red wine she had planned to spill. Jackson's best man delivered a heartfelt speech about our relationship and the kind of partner Jackson had found in me, bringing tears to many eyes. Lauren followed with a beautiful tribute to our friendship and the journey that had led me to this day. As she spoke about growth and finding the courage to be true to oneself, I saw my father become increasingly agitated, clearly realizing his opportunity to publicly embarrass me was slipping away. When the speeches concluded and the band began to play again, my grandmother rose from her seat and approached the band leader. After a brief exchange, she walked to the center of the dance floor and the music faded. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice rang out clearly, commanding the attention of all 200 guests. "As the grandmother of the bride, I would like to offer a special gift to the newlyweds. A family tribute, if you will." My parents exchanged alarmed glances. This was not part of their carefully orchestrated plan. My father half rose from his seat, but a subtle shake of my grandmother's head stopped him cold. "In our family, she continued, "we believe in honesty and transparency, values that have perhaps sometimes been forgotten." At her signal, Jackson's friend Marcus activated the large screens that had been set up around the ballroom, supposedly for a standard wedding photo montage. Instead, what appeared was something very different. The first image showed my parents' house, specifically the hallway outside my father's study. Then came audio crystal clear and unmistakable of their conversation planning to humiliate me. My father discussing his speech about my childhood embarrassments. My mother's arrangements with the photographer to ensure unflattering photos. And most damning of all, Mallory's detailed plan to ruin my wedding dress during the reception. The room fell silent except for the audio playing through the speakers. 200 guests sat in stunned disbelief as my family's true nature was laid bare for all to see. I watched as recognition dawned on the faces of my father's colleagues, my mother's social circle, and all the guests they had insisted on inviting to witness my humiliation. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red, my mother had gone completely white, and Mallory seemed to be trying to sink beneath the table. Before they could recover, I stood up, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. "I discovered this plot 1 week ago," I said, looking around the room at the shocked faces of our guests. At first, I was devastated. What kind of parents plan to humiliate their daughter on what should be one of the happiest days of her life? What kind of sister conspires against her own flesh and blood? I took a deep breath and continued feeling Jackson's supportive presence beside me. But then I realized something important. This day is not about them. It is about Jackson and me, our love and our future together. It is about the family we choose, not the family we are born into. I looked directly at my parents for the first time. I spent my entire life trying to earn your approval, your love. No accomplishment was ever enough, no effort ever recognized. Today I am finally free of that burden. I do not need your approval anymore. I have found people who love me exactly as I am. The room remained hushed, hundreds of eyes moving between me and my humiliated family. My father was the first to recover, standing abruptly. "This recording has clearly been manipulated." He announced his doctor's authority failing him for once as his voice trembled slightly. "An unfortunate prank that should not mar this otherwise lovely occasion." "Is it manipulated, Thomas?" My Aunt Patricia, my father's sister, stood up from her table. "Because it sounds exactly like the kind of thing you would say. The same cruelty you showed when you cut me out of your life for marrying someone you deemed beneath our family's status." Several other guests began to murmur in agreement. Apparently my parents had made a habit of their judgmental, status-obsessed behavior, and I was far from their only victim. My mother grabbed her purse and stood. "We are leaving," she hissed at my father. "Now." "Running away, Eleanor," my grandmother challenged. "How unlike you to miss a social occasion. I thought appearances were everything." Mallory shot me a venomous glare and followed my parents as they made their way toward the exit, many guests deliberately turning their backs as they passed. Just before they reached the door, my mother turned. "You will regret this public spectacle, Isolde," she said, her voice cold. I met her gaze without flinching. "No, Mother. The only thing I regret is spending so many years believing I was not enough, but that ends today." "Casey." As the door closed behind them, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Jackson took my hand and squeezed it gently. "Ladies and gentlemen," he addressed our guests, "my wife and I would like to thank you for sharing this day with us, unexpected drama and all. Now, if you will join us, I believe it is time for our first dance." As we moved to the center of the floor and the band began to play our song, Jackson pulled me close. "You are magnificent," he whispered. "I have never been more proud or more in love." In that moment, surrounded by people who truly cared for us, I finally felt completely free. The rest of the reception became the joyful celebration it was meant to be, with the dance floor packed until the early hours of the morning. When Jackson and I finally departed for our honeymoon suite, it was to applause and genuine well wishes from friends old and new. My family had tried to make me the laughingstock of my own wedding. Instead, their cruelty had been exposed and I had found my voice. As Jackson and I fell asleep in each other's arms that night, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them with a strength I had never known I possessed. Our honeymoon in Bali was exactly what I needed, a full 2 weeks immersed in a different world, far from the emotional aftermath of the wedding. Jackson and I stayed in a private villa overlooking the Indian Ocean, spending our days exploring ancient temples, swimming in crystalline waters, and connecting with each other in ways that deepened our bond. There were moments when the pain of my family's betrayal would surface unexpectedly, bringing tears or anger, but Jackson was there to hold me through each wave of emotion. "Healing is not linear," he reminded me one evening as we watched the sunset from our balcony. "You are allowed to feel everything, Isolde. The good, the bad, all of it." By the time we returned to Connecticut, I felt stronger, more centered in myself. Our apartment, which had once seemed like a temporary space, now truly felt like home as we settled into married life. The first indication of the social fallout from our wedding came in the form of a handwritten note from Jackson's mother. "Several of our friends who attended the wedding have reached out," she wrote. "They wanted you to know that your parents and sister have been notably absent from the country club and hospital fundraisers. Apparently, your father's medical partners have expressed concerns about his judgment and temperament after witnessing the recording." I felt no satisfaction in their social exile, only a quiet sense that perhaps consequences had finally found them. For the first few weeks after our return, my phone remained silent of any contact from my immediate family. I threw myself into work, taking on new design clients, and finding unexpected joy in creating spaces that reflected people's authentic selves rather than social expectations. My grandmother became a regular presence in our lives, having decided to move from her home in Boston to a smaller apartment just 20 minutes from us. Over Sunday brunches, she filled in the gaps of family history that had been hidden from me, painting a picture of a family dynamic that had been dysfunctional long before I was born. "Your father was always hungry for status," she told me one afternoon as we sat in her new sun-filled living room. "When he married your mother, it got worse. They fed each other's worst instincts, always climbing, always judging. I tried to intervene when you girls were young, but they limited my access. I should have fought harder." "It is not your fault, Grandma," I assured her, squeezing her hand. "You did what you could, and you were there when it mattered most." The holiday season brought its own challenges. For the first time, there would be no obligatory family dinner, no pretending to enjoy my mother's perfectly orchestrated but emotionally sterile gatherings. Instead, Jackson and I hosted a small Thanksgiving with his parents, my grandmother, and a few close friends. The warmth and genuine laughter that filled our home that day showed me what family celebrations could and should be. Through it all, I worked with a therapist to process the years of emotional neglect and criticism I had endured. Dr. Winters helped me recognize patterns I had internalized, the perfectionism and people-pleasing tendencies that had shaped so much of my life. "You cannot change your past," she told me during one particularly difficult session, "but you can change how it affects your future. Setting boundaries is not selfish, Isolde. It is necessary for healthy relationships." Those boundaries were tested 6 months after the wedding when I discovered I was pregnant. The joy Jackson and I felt was overwhelming, but it came with a complicated question: would we allow my parents and sister to be part of our child's life? "Whatever you decide, I will support you," Jackson said as we discussed it late into the night. "But our baby deserves to be surrounded by people who love unconditionally, not people who measure worth by achievements or social standing." After much consideration, I decided to reach out, not from a place of seeking reconciliation necessarily, but from a desire to give them one chance to be different with the next generation. I sent a simple email informing them of the pregnancy and stating clearly that if they wanted to be involved in their grandchild's life, there would be non-negotiable conditions. The response came 3 days later, not by email, but in the form of my parents appearing at our door on a Sunday afternoon. My mother held a gift bag, my father stood uncomfortably beside her, both looking somewhat diminished from the confident, controlling figures I remembered. "May we come in?" My mother asked, her usual imperious tone, replaced by something almost tentative. I hesitated, then nodded, leading them to our living room, where Jackson sat protectively nearby as we talked. The conversation was strained with long silences and careful words. They made no direct reference to the wedding incident, but my father eventually cleared his throat. "We have been doing some thinking," he said, not quite meeting my eyes, "and some talking, with a professional." This admission of seeking therapy, something my father had always dismissed as a weakness, shocked me more than anything else could have. "We would very much like to be part of your child's life," my mother added. "We understand that things will be different, that there will be terms." I laid out my boundaries clearly. No criticism of my parenting choices, no undermining my authority with my child, no pushing of their social agenda, and most importantly, unconditional love and acceptance of their grandchild, regardless of their interests, abilities, or choices. "If you cannot agree to these terms," I concluded, "then you will not have a role in our child's life. I will not subject my child to the same conditional love I grew up with." They agreed, though. Whether from genuine change or simply the fear of losing access to their grandchild, I could not be sure. Only time would tell if they could actually honor these boundaries. Mallory took longer to reach out. When she finally did, it came in the form of a letter that arrived about a month after my parents' visit. Unlike them, she directly addressed what had happened at the wedding. "I do not expect forgiveness," she wrote. "What I planned to do was cruel and inexcusable. For too long, I have defined myself by being the favorite, the perfect daughter, feeding off the approval that came at your expense. It was easier to participate in tearing you down than to question the dynamic that raised me up. I am trying to understand why I became the person who would hurt her sister that way, and I do not like what I am discovering about myself." Her letter contained no request to be part of my child's life. No expectations of reconciliation, just an acknowledgement of wrongdoing and a commitment to change. It felt more genuine than my parents' careful overture, perhaps because she asked for nothing in return. As my pregnancy progressed, we maintained cautious, limited contact with my family. My parents attended one ultrasound appointment, visibly emotional at the sight of their grandchild on the screen. Mallory sent thoughtful gifts for the baby, but kept her distance, respecting the space I needed. It was a tentative beginning, the first steps on a long road that might or might not lead to true healing. The day our daughter Elise was born was transformative in ways I had not anticipated. Holding her in my arms, I felt a fierce, protective love, unlike anything I had ever experienced. Looking into her perfect face, I made a silent promise that she would always know her worth, would never question if she was enough, would grow up surrounded by genuine love, rather than conditional approval. When my parents visited the hospital, there was an awkwardness that gradually gave way to something softer as they held their granddaughter. For the first time in my memory, I saw my father's eyes fill with tears. "She is perfect," he whispered, a statement so unlike his usual measuring and judging that I almost did not recognize his voice. My mother, holding Elise with unexpected tenderness, looked up at me. "You did well, Isolde," she said, and for once there was no qualification, no subtle critique hidden in her praise. These moments did not erase the past or guarantee a healthier future, but they offered possibilities I had not dared to hope for. The boundaries I had established remained firmly in place, and I watched carefully for any sign of the old patterns emerging. But there seemed to be a genuine effort, however imperfect, to relate to me and my family differently. Grandma Margaret, of course, took to great-grandmother status with natural ease, becoming Elise's fiercest champion and favourite person apart from her parents. The bond between them was immediate and powerful, as if they recognised in each other kindred spirits. "She has your strength," my grandmother told me as she rocked Elise to sleep one evening, "and none of the fear. You have already given her what took you years to find for yourself." Those words stayed with me, a reminder of the journey I had travelled. From the people-pleasing daughter desperate for approval, to a woman who had found the courage to stand in her own truth, protect her own heart, and create the family she deserved. The path had not been easy or straight. There had been moments of doubt, days when the pain of betrayal felt fresh again, times when I questioned if cutting ties completely might have been simpler than navigating the complicated terrain of conditional forgiveness and careful rebuilding. But I had chosen this middle way, not for my parents' sake, but for my own, a path that allowed me to release the bitterness without abandoning my boundaries. As I watch my daughter grow, now taking her first wobbly steps and babbling her first attempts at words, I think about the legacy I want to leave her. Not one of perfect appearances or social standing, but of authenticity and courage. I want her to know that she comes from a line of women who eventually found their voices, even if it took some of us longer than others. I want her to understand that family is not just about blood, but about choice, about creating connections based on respect and genuine care rather than obligation or expectation. My relationship with my parents and sister continues to evolve, sometimes progressing, sometimes regressing, but always within the protective boundaries I have established. Whether they will ever fully transform their fundamental values remains to be seen, but I have learned that I cannot control their journey, only my own response to it. What I know with certainty is this. The girl who once bent herself into knots seeking approval that never came has become a woman who stands firmly in her own worth. The fear of disappointing others has been replaced by a deeper fear of betraying myself, and the belief that I was somehow never enough has given way to the understanding that I always was exactly as I am. So if you find yourself trapped in a cycle of seeking validation from people who are incapable of giving it, know that you have options. You can rewrite the story you have been told about yourself. You can choose which voices to listen to and which to silence. You can build a life filled with people who celebrate rather than diminish you. It may not happen overnight. It may require painful confrontations and difficult choices. But I promise you, on the other side of that journey is a freedom you cannot imagine until you experience it for yourself. What family dynamics have you had to overcome in your own life? Have you ever had to set boundaries with loved ones? Share your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life experiences. Remember that sharing these stories helps others feel less alone in their struggles. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you courage on yours.